The film, The King's Choice, in Norwegian, it's interesting, the title is Kongens Nei, which translates to The King's No, The King's No, N-O. It's a 2016 biographical biopic, what we call directed by Eric Papa. Eric Papa is a tremendous director. He's been nominated for the Academy Award several times, his films. He's one of Denmark's most popular directors. But this is also a co-production. Not just, it's Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Ireland, and was selected as the Norwegian entry for the best foreign language film at the 2018 Academy Awards. It did make the short list. It didn't make the top 5, but it made the top, what we call the top 9. That's the short list that they look at first before they choose the final 5. Anyway, The King's Choice, as you've seen, is a dramatic tale about a pivotal World War II moment. For many of us, and even me, it was relatively obscure in history, but it's a story infused with tension, psychological conflict, and it's all the more engrossing because we're really not familiar with the actors, and it's all fresh to us. You know, it's an enlightenment. It's an enlightening film. The king in question, Haakon VII, he was born Prince Carl Erik of Denmark. He was the first king of Norway since the 12th century. Apparently, you know, Sweden had absorbed Norway, and they were basically one country. But from 1905, Norway split from Sweden in the late 19th century, and in 1905, they recruited Haakon to become their head of state, their king. And he reigned from 1905 until his death at the age of 85 in 1957. In the time leading up to the German invasion of Norway, that's depicted in the film, Haakon finds himself and the monarchy under the threat of the socialist right-wing party and the fascists. He is not safe and forced to act according to the wishes of the ruling government. The choice he came to during these 3 hectic days in April of 1940 not only determined his country's specific fate during the war, it speaks to broader questions. And this is where it gets, this film becomes much more resonant and relevant today, and I mean this day, to broader questions about the moral role of leaders, whether they be constitutional monarchs or not, whether they be presidents of their country, whether they be monarchs of their country. It calls into question their moral role. And that could not be more resonant, more relevant, and more true than right now with the war unfolding in Ukraine and the great moral choice of Zelensky has made for his people. The great moral choice, especially if you heard his speech this morning, was a rousing, his speech to the parliament was a rousing speech. As we see The King's Choice gives short shrift to hindsight, its intent is to show us how difficult it is to see how clearly, during the times of crisis, how what seems as simple black and white today was the source of uncertainty and soul searching when it happens. And we're going through that right now. There are so many political ambushes, political things in the weeds. For the conflicts in this film go far beyond the obvious one between invading Germans and invaded Norwegians. A significant part of the film deals with the serious internal disagreements on both sides of the battle line. And the key German official, far from being vilified, is shown to be hostile to invasion and a passionate believer in negotiation over military might. Before that, and I'll talk more about him later on, before the film properly begins, we're provided with an epilogue, a backstory concerning how Norway, if you remember and its actual footage, how Norway, having been united with Sweden since the 19th century, became its own country and chose a Danish royal to become the ceremonial head of state. And they crowned him Haakon VII. who was Haakon VI, was a king from a long time ago. And he comes with his wife and infant son, the newly minted Crown Prince Olav. We flash forward 35 years from there, and now older King Haakon, who has suffered the loss of his beloved wife, is gleefully playing hide and seek with his lively grandchildren in the snowy courtyard of his son's estate. Now, it's interesting because it makes you think back to this scene. He's playing hide and seek, which becomes a metaphor for what will ensue between Haakon and Olav and their evasion of the Nazis. They too are playing a game of hide and seek. It was very interesting to me to see how they structured the film. Facing challenges from domestic and foreign sources in Norway, socialists would like to dispense with the king altogether. But a far more serious threat comes at the beginning of April's second week when the Germans make their intention, and this is again resonant of today. They made their intention, to take over, creating anxiety, to take over pure and simple, rather than claiming that the British have mined. Remember, right? They claimed that the British had mined Norway's coast, and they were going to protect them from the British. The Nazis essentially said they want to help with the country maintain its neutrality. Sound familiar? And are open to negotiations for it will be in reality an outright surrender. An outright surrender. Much of Norway's leadership wants to fight the invasion, and the film's first act includes that brilliantly staged scene when the Norwegian coastal artillery emplacements fire on and destroy the approaching German warship, the Blucher. But the German war machine is simply too enormous and powerful to be resisted for long. And it only takes hours for it to occupy Norway's main cities. As we see that Norway's cabinet members also flee the capital, but their hasty deliberations make it clear that this is a government in shambles, confused and unsure of what to do to save the country from disaster. They look to the king almost as a totemic figure, and he does project resolve and courage, but he also needs to provide the occasional reminder that he is just a figurehead, not a monarch with any but ceremonial powers, that he has to depend on these men to do what's right. There is one other person who looks to the king as if he is indeed a man in charge, and that is Adolf Hitler. The film's most prominent German character, Kurt Brauer, an envoy who wants to arrange negotiations in order to transition Norway to German control with minimal bloodshed, a desire that meets with scorn from his Nazi commander, Lieutenant Colonel Pullman. In one scene, the envoy is on the phone to Berlin. Remember that scene? He's on the phone to Berlin arguing his case when someone on the other end grabs the phone and tells him what to do. And it's the Fuhrer himself. And he orders Brauer to forget about the elected government and get the king's agreement. This sets up both the envoy's pursuit of Haakon in the third act and the choice the king must make. More impulsive and quicker to anger than his father is Olav, who's determined to do something, anything, as fast as possible. But Haakon, looking like the weight of the world is on him, and remember that scene when he's stretching, he's curled up on the rug because of his back. You feel that's where he's feeling this weight, this tension of the world on him, as it surely is. And keenly aware of the constitutional nature of the monarchy, he wants to make sure that the government has its say and that negotiations that might save lives are always pursued. This was important to him. Extending over just 2 more days, the film is packed with incident and conflict. On April 9th, we begin with Haakon and Olav and their family needing to flee from the invaders by train, and the scene of the chaos that results when German planes later on strafe their train is a vivid and involving scene. Brauer, for his part, is trying to persuade the Norwegian government to call the unfolding invasion voluntary cooperation. It's just an operation. Sound familiar? while simultaneously battling his own country's ascendant military, intent on shooting everything in sight. And his own young wife, Olav's wife, Brower's wife, who has political ideas of her own. We see the discordance in that marriage. On the Norwegian side, not only do Haakon and Olav have serious policy disputes, they too will fight. But the Crown Prince is also in conflict with his own wife, Crown Princess Maertha, about what his personal course of action should be. She even is concerned. Meanwhile, the king and his son are moving ever further northward, trying to stay one step ahead of the Germans. Defending them are a small group of Norwegian soldiers, including very young Frederick Seaberg. This was a nice piece of drama, who impulsively promises to give his all for the monarch. Though touched by the boy's naive earnestness, that scene is wonderful when Haakon gently corrects him. And he says to him, "We give our all for Norway, not the king. We give our all for Norway, not the king," he says. And it is his unbending determination to do what he thinks is best for the country that becomes the central drama of this film. Finally, in postscript, as even Brower goes to meet with him and fails, to do anything, in the postscript, we see Haakon finally reunited with his grandson. By the way, it was during this whole period, and we that a certain term was born out of this particular event. If you remember, we hear his voice, but we never see the fascist leader, Vidkun Quisling, who proclaimed himself prime minister over the radio and called upon the Norwegian people to accept the German occupation forces. His name would become forever established as a synonym for the word traitor. We've brought up Quisling very recently in our own history. After the war, the king did not continue the political role that he played during this event and limited himself to his constitutional duties as head of state. He was considered, as a result of this action and what he did following with his controlling from Great Britain, he offered radio broadcasts. He constantly offered support for the people. In fact, they would wear little coins with his crest, his face emblazoned on them, and the name Haakon in support of the king. He was considered the highest moral authority in the country and enjoyed great esteem in all classes of the population after the war, following the war. He was one of the most beloved rulers in all of Europe. In 1957, Olav went on to reign and become known as the People's King. Like his father, he chose not to exercise much executive power, yet commanded a great deal, again, of moral authority as a symbol of the nation's unity, which was the result of their participation during the war. His wife, Maertha, Olav's wife, Maertha, who was a sister of Queen Astrid of Belgium, died in 1955 of cancer. And Olav never remarried and ruled Norway until 1997. And the grandson that you see at the end of the film is the ruler today. He's presently the ruler of Norway. On the 16th of April, Hitler recalled Brower from Oslo, deciding that the Norwegian resistance dictated that the country be administered by a more authoritarian personality. As a result, Hitler named a rabid Nazi named Joseph Turbovin to wield near dictatorial powers. He defied orders, by the way, of some German higher-ups. Joseph Goebbels, whose secretary married this guy, he told him to act with two faces, act politely to the Norwegians while you're doing your dirty work. He didn't. He was terrible. He built concentration camps in Norway. He massacred people. He massacred emigres. He was involved in one operation where 200 Yugoslavs who were had gone into Norway. He had them all killed instantly, and he was a monster until the end of the war. And he also took the coward's way out. He blew himself up as the Allies were freeing the countries. After his recall from Norway, Brower left the diplomatic service. Incidentally, he had been an envoy. He had been in political life since 1920. His first wife had died, and the woman in the film is his second wife, Annalisa, who he met in the late 20s. And he had gone to Oslo in 1939 because he wanted to get away from the impending war. He thought that Norway would be a safe place for them to go. Little did he know. But after his recall, he was sent to the front as a lieutenant in the Wehrmacht. He was captured by the Russians, and he spent 8 years as a prisoner of war in a Soviet prison. He was finally released, and he died in Germany in 1969. But through all these, these colorful moments in the film, and watching them on the run, especially that scene towards the end when they're running through the forest and the bombs are falling, and Haakon even commits an act of bravery. I mean, a lot of this was documented. His relations with the young soldiers. That was apparently a documented event, and that kid was a real soldier. He was awarded a military, I guess, a Norwegian military cross later on. So a lot of this, even though it feels dramatized, some of it feels dramatized, a lot of it was really done, and it's interesting because the actors really are top notch. They're Danish actors. Some of them are Danish. The one who plays King Haakon he's Danish. He's Danish, and the film walked off with something like 9 or 10 Norwegian Academy Awards. And the actor who plays Kurt Brower, he's Austrian. His name is Karl Markovich, and he's a very prominent director and actor. He's acted in international film here in America, but he directed an Academy Award-winning film a number of years ago. He starred in an Academy Award-winning film called The Counterfeiters. If any of you have ever seen the film The Counterfeiters, which was also about a German operation to counterfeit international money, dollars, marks, Swiss marks, and flood the market with counterfeit bills, was based on a counterfeiter in a concentration camp, which was portrayed by Karl Markovich. He's a wonderful actor. He's gone on to directing some terrific films as well. So you had a great cast. The sound in the film, the cinematography, all done very well. I mean, Eric Papa really vindicates himself with this film, and it's fresh to see. We don't see that much fighting, but enough of it to feel the war. But it's really more about the psychological impact on the people involved, on the governments involved, and how they react. Those meetings that they kept having and the arguments they had, and trying to work this out, was very interesting and very reminiscent of what we see today with governments. So there you have a synopsis of the film, taking you through these characters. Now I'd like to open it up and hear what people have to say. If anybody has any comments, anything they'd like to add to the film, ask about the film, just raise your, you can go into the, raise your little yellow hand there. They have those little things. Linda, I see your real hand.
Shelly, first, I just wanted to comment somewhere along the line, what I really liked was when someone said a diplomat is supposed to work for peace. Something that we should be thinking about. In any case, something very, just a curiosity for me. What happened to the king's wife? Did she rather stay in England?
No, the king's wife died. She died some years before the war. He was, and that affected him. We see him getting older during the film, especially in 1945. He looked much more gaunt when he goes to greet his grandson. It affected him greatly.
So the loss he was a widower? Wife. He was a widower he was all that time?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. She had died in the 30s. Yeah.
And my other question was, they mentioned his brother. Now, his brother was the King of Denmark, correct?
Yeah, Christian, yes.
So was he the younger of the two brothers?
Yes, and it's interesting because what they tried to convince him to do, to abdicate, was or capitulate, actually to capitulate and to work with the Germans, was they said your brother Christian capitulated, and that's the Nazis walked into Denmark without firing a shot, but he wouldn't. It shows the difference in their behavior. And he never really felt that he was going to be a king. When they enlisted him, they specifically wanted a Dane. They didn't want a Swede because they'd broken off from Sweden. So they specifically enlisted him because they really wanted just a figurehead. He would just be emblematic of a king. But he got more involved, and then he stepped back after the war. He felt that he didn't want to exercise executive powers. He could be responsible for the cabinet and helping form the cabinet, but he cannot reinstate the cabinet after their term is up. It all has to be done by vote.
I love the historical footage that they added too. That's always makes it more meaningful.
Yeah, it brings us in nicely to the film. Absolutely. Somebody else, Marilyn, just mentioned Atlantic Crossing. If any of you saw it on Masterpiece Theater.
It was great background for this film.
Yeah, I think you could still find it.
Later. In other words, it sort of continued where this one stopped.
Yes.
And it took it further. What I really admired and thought he was the king was wonderful was when I really got the feeling that the choice he made was what he thought was best for the country. And it was more important that he did what he felt was right for the country than anything else. And that was his moral compass for me, and was worthy of a lot of respect.
Absolutely. I mean, he did, very much, he was very much tuned into what was going on in Norway throughout the war from Great Britain. He made radio broadcasts and he refused, even though they sort of, the Nazis announced that they were deposing him when they put Quisling in. He refused to recognize Quisling, number one, and he even reported that to his people, that he's not your leader. So he spoke out. He constantly spoke out against that. And there was a resistance in Norway. It was not a large resistance, but there was a resistance movement. They were blowing up. What they were doing was the Nazis wanted Norway for a specific reason. Norway had heavy water. They could create heavy water. And he wanted that when they were starting to develop the V2, their rockets, and they were having an inkling that they could develop an atomic bomb. So that was one of the reasons. They were rich in resources, and the resistance was blowing up the boats in the harbor. There were big movements to blow up the boats in the harbor. That was what the resistance was really interested in. There was a renowned resistance fighter. His name was Max Manus. And there is a film entitled Max Manus, which is about the resistance in Norway. It's an interesting film. It's the only other film I knew about any resistance was a film made many years ago with Kirk Douglas. Many of you may remember, called The Heroes of Telemark. The Heroes of Telemark. And that was about an operation done by the Allies to stop the Germans from getting a hold of the heavy water. Jackie.
I was just going to ask, will you explain a little bit more about Quisling and the whole traitor thing? I missed something there.
Yeah, sure. Well, Quisling was a fascist. He led the fascist party in Norway. It was actually a far right party, and they really didn't have much traction. He was constantly trying to run. He was constantly trying to get inroads in the government, and he was always failing. Nobody really liked him. Nobody really listened to him. But he managed to get the Nazis to agree with him to make him the functionary head of the government, which he assumes. When the Nazis took over and the king left, the cabinet was broken up because the Nazis broke up any inkling of democracy in the country, and they let him run the government. And because his voice would come over the radio, and he would say to them, you know, work with the Germans. So Quisling became, you know, synonymous with traitor. He was a traitor. He totally capitulated and worked with the Germans, with the Nazis, trying to convince the Norwegians that they should do the same. So that's what happened with him.
So,
yeah, Meryl.
Shelly, if Denmark capitulated, Sweden also gave in. So was Norway the
Well, Sweden was neutral. Sweden was neutral. Sweden declared neutrality, and for some reason, well, they were recognized for the neutrality. However, the reason they recognized the neutrality was they let the Germans walk through.
right?
The Germans could walk through to go to the ocean, to go to the sea. The Germans needed access through Sweden, and they let the Swedes pass through, but they couldn't occupy the country because they maintained their neutrality. But it's a very, you know, it's a hidden fact that they were complicit during the war by letting the Germans do that, by letting the Nazis do that. You know, there were a lot of they don't admit to a lot of it, but it's come up over the years, their cooperation with the Germans.
So Norway was the only country that was you know, Norway of that.
Well,
Baltic.
Finland was occupied by there was what they called the Winter War. The Finnish soldiers, first they were supported by the Russians, and the Russians were fighting the Nazis. Then they were working with the Germans. They were torn apart, you know, back and forth, the Finnish.
So close. I mean, you could see Finland from St. Petersburg. I mean,
right.
they're really close.
Yeah.
So
yeah. You know, and the Germans moved up there to resist, to keep the Russians out and use it as a front to get into Russia. But they used the Finnish soldiers, the Russians used the Finnish soldiers to fight the Germans. And it was a losing battle. It was a losing battle. That's also related to, it's interesting you bring it up because that's related to another important event, which not many people know about. As some of you I'm sure do, was Finland sent thousands and thousands of children into Sweden during the war because Sweden was neutral. A lot of children were sent into Sweden, adopted by forced by Swedish parents during the war. They were just, sent over there. And a lot of them stayed after the war, stayed in Sweden. But there was a big movement, and there's a film that deals with that called Mother of Mine, which shows it from the perspective of one person. It's a very interesting film that deals with, again, another little known event You know, they had the kinder transports for the Jewish children.
Mhm.
Well, the Finnish had sent their children out of the country to avoid the war. To avoid the war. Anybody else out there?
We have some comments in the chat, Shelley.
Oh, more? Oh, great.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Somebody mentioned it looks like he had leather straps on his legs. Yeah, he had a very bad back. And if you remember, he's all curled up on the rug at one point when they come to him near the beginning, because when they come to tell him that they want him to leave, so he needed to wear. He wore them to support his back. He had a terrible back. Okay, Susan Mann, I like the film expanding the story. The 8 parts is Atlantic Crossing. Yes. The German spies on US beaches. It's known as Operation Pastorius. Yes, the U-boat surfaced not far from where Maertha was staying in Long Island that summer. Yes, in June 1942, 2 squads of saboteurs, all US residents who returned to Germany to serve the Reich, were dropped by U-boat on beaches into New York and Florida. I think some of them are still here, Ponte Vedra Beach. Anyway, respectively, the saboteurs' plot was actually foiled from within. The group's leader, 39-year-old George Dash, called the FBI to volunteer their plans. A military tribunal later found all 8 men guilty. Yes. Claire Kirkin, it was amazing how the Allies stopped Hitler from finishing the atomic bomb in that plant in Norway. I visited the plant. Thank you. Yes. There you go. There you go. How true. How true. Thank you, Clara. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add? Come on, all you historians. Anybody? Barbara?
Barbara, you have to unmute.
You have to unmute, Barbara.
Okay. Hi. I don't know if there's another Barbara.
Oh,
I don't know if you're.
Yes,
about
there
me.
is. But okay, we'll take you first since you unmuted,
okay.
and then Barbara.
I already made a comment about the Atlantic crossing, which I found fascinating, about Maertha's effort in the States to try to draw in the US into the war and try to support Norway. And I think at some point in the movie, they mentioned the fact that, you know, she is, I think, also related to the Swedish royal family, and they were
She was her sister.
Her sister, exactly. They were afraid that they would lose their neutrality by having the Norwegians in their country. So that was very traumatic for me, that her sister had to turn her back on her. I found that very difficult to deal with. But anyway, this is a fact. Thank you so much, Shelley. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you, Barbara. Barbara Tate, have you unmuted?
Okay. I knew nothing about this. And it's not that I'm ignorant on World War II, because I'm not, and my father fought in it, but I knew nothing about the Scandinavian royalty. And it's a very tangled bunch of relationships. And one of them married their first cousin, and half of them are descendants of Queen Victoria. There's just one whole big mess. I spent a lot of time on Wikipedia afterwards trying to sort out who was who, and I knew nothing about the King of Norway. I thought the man who played the king was just wonderful. I just loved him. And I'm glad you brought out that point about the hide and seek, because I didn't make that connection until you said in the beginning he's playing hide and seek with the children, and then you see it later with the German.
These are structural elements in a screenplay that, you know, it's when you think about it later on, you get into a discussion. You get into a discussion like this, and you know, somebody points out, well, you know, there's meaning in everything a director does, or there should be anyway, in these kinds of films. And that's what we see here. Even though he's basing a lot of it on history, he's throwing in little elements, exaggerated elements, to get to the structure of the screenplay, which is the game, which is really the game that becomes part of the war. But that's terrific. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm glad you did go and research who these people are. It is a tangled web. It is a tangled web. Yeah, yeah.
The Tangled Web by Queen Victoria.
Yes. Well, that was her plan. Populate Europe with her monarchs, with her children.
She had so many children.
Yeah, on purpose. You would think she was Hasidic. Anyway, Nora.
It was interesting. I watched the movie last night and I could have been watching the news. It was like watching exactly what's happening now. And it was very frightening. It was so similar that it was so frightening.
Yeah, not only that, what's interesting is, Haakon had to leave because he had people in his government that were going to get him out. Whereas with Ukraine, it's, his cabinet supported him, his people support him, Zelensky, right. And therefore he's able to stay, and he refuses to leave. I mean, I love his comment when when we said we'd give him, we'd get him out, we'd give him access. He said, I don't need a car. Right. I don't need a car. I need help. I need arms. Right. When they said, we'll get you in a car, we'll get you out. No, he's staying. And his speech was very much like Churchill. He learned from history and he used it with the parliament. I thought it was brilliant. I just hope he lives to collect his Nobel. That's all. Yeah.
And the bombing of the people trying to get out was just like the bombing they showed with them on the train. I mean, it was just unbelievable watching it. I could have had the news on. It was very scary.
Yeah, well, I'm glad it resonated with you. And I, this film was planned long before we had any inkling of this. Talk about serendipity.
I was thinking of that. You planned it a long time ago. Wow.
Yes. Thank you, Nora. Anybody else out there? I can't see. You're all wearing masks. I can't see. Okay. Nobody? Wow.
Well, I'll ask.
Good.
King Olav, I know he lived to a later age in life, not sure exactly how old he was, but when his wife died so young, he never remarried?
No, he never remarried. He was very much like his father. And that's one of the things in the film is, they fight with each other. They have their disagreements. The son wants to storm ahead. He's a fighter. He went to military school. Olav attended military school. He was also the first king of Norway, brought up in Norway. You got to remember, Haakon came from Denmark, so he was brought. They insisted on bringing him up in Norway and sending him to school in Norway. But they fought. They had their disagreements, but they loved each other. Yes, they really loved each other. His son really loved the father. They were very close, very close. And when his wife died, he just never remarried. Although he had a grandchild, they did see Haakon himself saw 2 great-grandchildren during his lifetime. And his great-grandchildren, one of them married a commoner, a very wealthy commoner, but one of them married a commoner, and another one married royally. I don't remember which it was, but a great-granddaughter married a commoner. Anybody else? Wait, not a lot of comments tonight. I'm surprised.
I know.
No? Well, let me talk about the next film. Okay, coming up next month is our Academy Award-winning film from 2019, Shoplifters, a wonderful Japanese film from one of contemporary cinema's greatest directors. His name is Hirokazu Koreeda. He is absolutely, all his films are gems. He's he's one of the most acclaimed and honored directors in the world, and he gives us another masterpiece with Shoplifters. The story involves, on the margins of Tokyo, it's a dysfunctional band of outsiders united by fierce loyalty. They have a penchant for petty theft and playful grifting. They, as I say, they are on the margins of society. They are the flotsam and jetsam of society. When they bring a young girl, a 5-year-old young girl into their fold, their below the radar existence is put to threat, and it's put to the test, as is their radical belief of what defines a family. I'd like you to have that in the back of your head as you watch the film. What defines a family in contemporary society, in any society? This is a charming, and I do warn you, it's a heart-wrenching film. Just the acting is wonderful. It's a compassionate film, and a socially conscious one. It will steal. At times, it will steal snatches from your heart. It really will. The kids in it are wonderful, as is the couple. It's just a wonderful. This is great ensemble acting, by the way, and hopefully it will give rise to you wanting to see more of his films, because he's an absolutely wonderful director. And I will give you a list of his films if you haven't already gotten it when I see you in 2 weeks. So if there's nothing further, I guess we'll bid you adieu. Marilyn?
Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. Shelley.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Shelley. It was really wonderful discussion. And in 2 weeks, we will be discussing Shoplifters on this program with Shelley, and the date is March 23rd. So mark your calendar.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Stay
Everybody.
safe.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
night.
Yes,
Thank you,
stay
Shelley.
safe, stay well.
Thank you.
Stay well. I look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good night. Good
Thank
night,
you,
everyone.
Julie. Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you.
Bye.
It's terrific. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.